In just 47 seconds, a television appearance went from polite conversation to absolute chaos. 47 seconds. That's all it took for Prince Harry to go from smiling guest to furious, red-faced, walking straight off the Loose Women set after a fiery confrontation with host Ruth Langsford that nobody saw coming. Voices raised, accusations thrown, and a dramatic exit that left the entire studio in shocked silence. The atmosphere in the Loose Women studio last night was electric from the moment Prince Harry walked onto that stage. The cameras were rolling, the audience was packed, and Ruth Langsford was sitting there with her notes, ready to have what everyone thought would be an interesting conversation. Harry sat down, all smiles and waves to the crowd, looking relaxed in his casual blazer. But Ruth had other plans. She wasn't there to throw softball questions. She had real issues to discuss. And from her very first words, you could feel the temperature in that room starting to rise. "Prince Harry, welcome to the show," Ruth began, her voice steady but with an edge that regular viewers of Loose Women would recognize instantly. "We're glad you're here, because there are some things that I think a lot of people in this country want answers to. Real answers, not the carefully worded statements we've been getting." Harry's smile flickered for just a moment. You could see it in his eyes, that brief flash of concern, like he suddenly realized this wasn't going to be the friendly chat he'd been promised. But he recovered quickly, leaning back in his chair with that practiced royal composure. "Of course, Ruth. I'm happy to talk about anything," he said, though his jaw was tight. Ruth didn't waste a single second. She went straight for it. "Let's talk about your family then. You've made a lot of money. Millions, actually. Talking about your father, your brother, your entire family to anyone with a camera or a checkbook. You've written books, done interviews, made documentaries, all of it airing your family's private business to the entire world. How do you justify that?" The audience went quiet. You could have heard a pin drop in that studio. Harry shifted in his seat, and his friendly expression started to harden. "With respect, Ruth, I've only shared my truth, my experiences, things that happened to me. I have every right to tell my own story." "Your truth?" Ruth interrupted, and her tone was sharp as glass. "But it's not just your truth, is it? It's their truth, too. Your father's truth, William's truth, Kate's truth. You're telling stories about private family conversations, private moments, and they can't defend themselves because they're bound by protocol. You know they can't fight back, and yet you keep going. That seems rather one-sided, doesn't it?" Harry's face was starting to flush. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "I'm not attacking anyone. I'm simply being honest about what I went through. The pain, the struggles, the lack of support. People need to know what it was really like." Ruth leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "But Harry, you've been asked this before and you never give a straight answer. You say you want privacy, you moved to America for privacy, yet you're constantly in the media talking about the very people you claim you want privacy from. You can't have it both ways. Either you want privacy or you want to be a public figure sharing everything. Which is it?" "That's not fair," Harry shot back, his voice rising just a notch. "You're twisting things." "I'm not twisting anything. I'm asking you directly. How can you complain about media intrusion while simultaneously inviting cameras into your life to talk about your family?" The tension was building with every word. You could see other panelists on the show glancing at each other nervously. The audience was completely still, watching this unfold like a car crash in slow motion. "Look, Ruth, I think you're being deliberately unfair here. You don't understand the pressure I was under. The institution, the system, it was suffocating. I had to get out, and yes, I've had to support my family financially, which means doing deals, doing projects. That's reality." Ruth wasn't backing down an inch. "Supporting your family? Harry, you inherited millions from your mother. Your father gave you money. You're not exactly struggling. And yet you're selling out your family for more money. That's what it looks like to millions of people watching." Harry's face went from flush to deep red. His voice got louder. "That's ridiculous. You have no idea what you're talking about. You sit here in your comfortable chair, judging me, when you have no clue what it was like being trapped in that life." "Trapped?" Ruth's voice was like steel now. "You were a prince. You had wealth, privilege, opportunities most people could only dream of. Yes, it came with responsibilities. But trapped? Really?" "Yes, Trapped! Harry was almost shouting now. You wouldn't understand. None of you would understand what it's like to have your entire life planned out for you. To have no say in anything. To be told to just smile and wave while you're dying inside. Then leave quietly, Ruth said firmly. That's what most people are saying. If you want it out, fine, leave. But why the constant interviews? Why the book? Why the documentaries? Why do you keep coming back to talk about how terrible they all are? Harry stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The cameras zoomed in as his composure completely shattered. Because they need to be held accountable. Because what they did was wrong. Because I'm not going to stay silent while people make me out to be the villain when I'm the one who suffered. Ruth stood up too, matching his energy, her voice cutting through the studio. But you are playing the victim, Harry. That's exactly what you're doing. You're a grown man, a father, and instead of moving on with your life, you're still fighting battles from years ago. Your grandmother just passed, your father is going through his own struggles, and you're still here, still talking, still selling stories. When does it end? When they apologize, Harry shouted. When they admit what they did. When they take responsibility. For what exactly? Ruth pressed. For raising you? For giving you opportunities? For dealing with their own problems while trying to run a country? What exactly do they owe you an apology for? The studio was in complete chaos now. Producers were scrambling, the other panelists looked stunned, and the audience was buzzing with shocked whispers. Harry pointed his finger at Ruth, his voice shaking with anger. You have no right to talk about my family like this. You don't know them. You don't know what happened behind closed doors. And neither does anyone else, Ruth fired back. But you're the one telling everyone anyway. You're the one making money off of it. You're the one who can't seem to let it go. This is bullshit, Harry said. And you could hear the fury in every syllable. This interview is bullshit. You invited me here just to attack me. I invited you here to ask you questions that the public wants answered, Ruth said calmly, though her eyes were blazing. Questions you've been avoiding for years. If you can't handle that, then maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. Maybe I shouldn't, Harry snapped. Maybe I should have known better than to come on a show where the host is clearly biased and has an agenda. Biased? Ruth's voice went up an octave. I'm asking you fair questions, Harry. If you can't answer them without losing your temper, that's on you, not me. Harry grabbed his microphone pack and started ripping it off. I'm done. I'm not sitting here listening to this. You're twisting everything I say. I'm not twisting anything, Ruth said, her voice echoing through the studio. I'm holding you accountable. That's what journalists do. That's what we're supposed to do. If you don't like it, if you can't handle it, then maybe you need to ask yourself why. Harry threw the microphone pack onto his chair. His face was a mixture of rage and something else. Something that almost looked like shame, but he covered it quickly with more anger. You know what, Ruth? This is exactly why I left. People like you, the media, always twisting things, always trying to make me look bad. I came here in good faith, and this is what I get. Good faith? Ruth laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. It was sharp and cutting. Harry, you came here to promote yourself, just like every other appearance you make. Don't pretend this was about having an honest conversation. You wanted a platform, and I gave you one. I just didn't ask the questions you wanted me to ask. One of the producers appeared at the edge of the stage, trying to calm things down, but it was too late. This had gone way past the point of no return. Harry turned to the producer, then back to Ruth. I want to make something very clear, Harry said, his voice lower now but still intense. My family, despite everything, despite all the pain they caused me, I still care about them. But I will not be silenced. I will not pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. And I certainly won't be lectured by someone who has no idea what she's talking about. Ruth crossed her arms, completely unfazed. Then enlighten me, Harry. Tell me what I'm missing. Explain to me how selling out your family's private moments is somehow noble. Explain to me how writing a book where you share intimate details about your father, your brother, and their lives is somehow the right thing to do. I'm listening. Harry's mouth opened, then closed. He looked around the studio, at the cameras, at the audience, at the other panelists who were all watching with wide eyes. For a moment, it seemed like he might actually try to answer. But then his face hardened again, and he shook his head. No, No, I'm not doing this. This is a setup. This whole thing is a setup, and I'm not playing along. It's not a setup, Harry. These are legitimate questions. Legitimate? Harry's voice cracked slightly. You're attacking me, Ruth. You're sitting there on your high horse, judging every decision I've made, and you're calling it journalism. It's not journalism. It's a hit job. Ruth's expression didn't change. She stood there, steady as a rock, not backing down one bit. If asking you to explain your actions is a hit job, then maybe your actions are the problem, not my questions. That did it. That was the final straw. Harry's face went from red to almost purple with rage. Right, that's it. I'm leaving. I'm not staying here to be insulted on national television. You're not being insulted, Ruth called after him as he started walking toward the edge of the stage. You're being asked questions. There's a difference. Harry stopped and turned around one more time, pointing at Ruth. You know what your problem is, Ruth? You think you're so much better than everyone else. You think you have the right to judge people you don't even know. Well, you don't. You don't know me. You don't know my family. And you certainly don't know what we've been through. Then tell us, Ruth said, spreading her arms wide. You're here. The cameras are on. Tell us your side. Give us the full story, instead of the selective bits you sell in books and interviews. But Harry was already walking away, his security team rushing to meet him at the edge of the stage. The cameras followed him as he stormed through the backstage area, pushing past crew members and producers who tried to speak to him. Ruth stood there in the middle of the stage, watching him go, her expression unreadable. The audience was in complete shock, some people with their hands over their mouths, others whispering frantically to the people next to them. The other panelists looked at Ruth, then at each other, clearly unsure of what to say or do. Well, Ruth finally said, turning back to the cameras, her voice steady despite everything that had just happened. I think that tells you everything you need to know, doesn't it? When you can't answer basic questions about your own actions, when you storm off instead of having a conversation, that speaks volumes. The producers were signaling frantically to go to a commercial break, but Ruth wasn't quite finished. We invited Prince Harry here tonight to have an honest discussion. We asked him questions that many people in this country have been asking for years. Questions about his decisions, his actions, his continued public attacks on his own family. And instead of answering those questions like an adult, he threw a tantrum and left. Make of that what you will. The cameras finally cut away as the show went to commercial, but backstage, the chaos was still unfolding. Harry was shouting at his team, demanding to know why they had booked him on a show with Ruth Langsford, claiming he'd been ambushed and set up. Staff members were rushing around, trying to manage the situation, while Ruth remained on stage, calmly discussing what had just happened with her fellow panelists. Did you expect that reaction? One of them asked her quietly. Ruth shrugged slightly. I expected him to be defensive. I didn't expect him to run away from the questions entirely, but then again, maybe I should have. It's what he does, isn't it? When things get difficult, when people push back, he leaves. The show came back from commercial, and Ruth addressed the audience directly. As you all just witnessed, Prince Harry has left the building. He was unwilling to continue our conversation, which is unfortunate because there was a lot more I wanted to discuss with him. Questions about his ongoing criticism of the royal family. Questions about his choices. Questions about what he hopes to achieve with his continued public attacks on the people who raised him. She paused, letting that sink in. But he chose to leave rather than engage with those questions. And I think that tells us everything we need to know about where he really stands. You can't claim to want dialogue, to want understanding, and then storm off the moment someone challenges you. That's not how conversations work. That's not how you build bridges or heal relationships. The audience murmured in agreement, many people nodding their heads. Ruth continued, her voice calm but firm. Look, everyone has family issues. Everyone has complicated relationships with their parents, their siblings, their relatives. That's part of being human. But most people don't write best-selling books about it. Most people don't do million-pound interviews about it. Most people try to work things out privately, with dignity, with respect for everyone involved. That's what adults do. She looked directly into the camera. Harry came here tonight, and I genuinely hoped we could have a real conversation. Not a promotional interview where he gets to say whatever he wants without being challenged. A real conversation where difficult questions get asked and answered. But he wasn't interested in that. He wanted a platform, not a discussion. And when he realized he wasn't going to get what he wanted, he left. Ruth sat back down, smoothing her skirt. So for everyone watching at home who wanted to hear Harry's answers to these important questions, I'm sorry. I tried. We all tried. But you can't force someone to be honest if they don't want to be. You can't force someone to take responsibility for their actions if they're not ready to do that. And clearly, Harry wasn't ready. The other panelists chimed in, some expressing shock at how quickly things had escalated, others agreeing with Ruth's approach. But Ruth remained the calmest person in that studio, despite having just been at the center of one of the most explosive confrontations in recent television history. The thing is, Ruth added, Harry wants sympathy. He wants people to see him as the victim in all of this. And yes, he's been through difficult things. Everyone acknowledges that. Losing his mother at such a young age was traumatic. Growing up in the public eye was challenging. Nobody denies that. But at some point, you have to move forward. At some point, you have to stop blaming everyone else for your problems and take ownership of your own life. And that's what I was trying to get him to see tonight. Someone in the audience started clapping, and soon others joined in, giving Ruth a round of applause. She smiled slightly, acknowledging it with a small nod. Thank you. But really, this isn't about me. This is about accountability. This is about whether someone who has spent years criticizing his family in public can handle being questioned about that in public. And based on what we all just saw, the answer appears to be no. He can dish it out, but he can't take it. The show continued, with the panel discussing what had just happened, analyzing Harry's reaction, debating whether Ruth's questions were fair or too harsh. But the consensus, both in the studio and among viewers at home, seemed to be clear. Harry had come onto the show expecting an easy ride, expecting to control the narrative like he always does. And when he encountered resistance, when he faced real pushback, he couldn't handle it. Ruth summed it up perfectly in her final words before the show ended. If you're going to spend years making your private family matters public, you need to be prepared for public scrutiny. You need to be prepared to answer questions, to justify your choices, to explain yourself. That's the deal. Harry seems to think he can have it both ways. That he can trash his family whenever he wants, in whatever medium he chooses, but nobody is allowed to question him about it. Well, sorry, but that's not how the world works. That's not how any of this works. And tonight, he learned that lesson the hard way. The cameras panned across the empty chair where Harry had been sitting just minutes earlier, his discarded microphone pack still lying there, a physical reminder of the dramatic walkout that had just occurred. It was an image that would be replayed on news programs and social media for days to come, a symbol of what happens when someone who's used to controlling the narrative suddenly loses that control. As the studio lights dimmed and the show went off air, Ruth remained seated for a moment, taking it all in. Staff members approached her, some concerned, others congratulating her on not backing down. But Ruth seemed unbothered by the whole ordeal. She'd asked the questions she felt needed to be asked, said what she felt needed to be said, and if Harry couldn't handle that, well, that wasn't her problem. The entire confrontation had lasted barely 20 minutes from start to finish, but it felt like hours. Every word had been loaded, every exchange more tense than the last, building to that explosive moment when Harry finally snapped and stormed off. It was television gold, but it was also something more than that. It was a real moment, a genuine clash between someone asking tough questions and someone who didn't want to answer them. Outside the studio, Harry's car sped away into the night, leaving behind a controversy that wouldn't die down anytime soon. Inside, Ruth packed up her notes, said goodnight to her colleagues, and prepared to face the inevitable media storm that would follow. But she seemed at peace with it all. She'd done her job. She'd asked the questions that needed asking. Whether Harry liked it or not, whether his supporters liked it or not, someone had finally held him accountable on live television. And the fact that he couldn't handle it, the fact that he'd walked out rather than face those questions, said more than any answer he could have given. The fallout from this confrontation would dominate headlines for weeks. with people taking sides, debating who was right and who was wrong. But for those who were there, for those who witnessed it firsthand, one thing was crystal clear. Ruth Langsford had invited Prince Harry onto her show for a conversation. And when that conversation got difficult, when it got uncomfortable, Harry ran. He literally walked away rather than defend his actions, rather than explain himself, rather than engage with legitimate criticism. And in doing so, he proved every point Ruth had been trying to make.